What is going on, y'all? It's your favorite 69th ranked player in Marvel Snap, here to give you a breakdown on the decks I think are the best for you to climb. Loki, to me, is the single best deck for climbing, for gaining ranks in Marvel Snap, and there are a lot of different things you can do in the shell. I know the current #1 ranked player has removed Collector entirely and is just playing extra tech. I know Dara is playing Alioth in there. I have opted for a fairly minimalist take on the archetype, which is to say I'm not doing much out of the ordinary, except I'm running Rogue. And what Rogue is here to do, a lot of the decks with Shadow King are playing Luke Cage. He's here to take that, make you immune to Shadow King. A lot of the decks that are trying to beat you with Mobius, when you Rogue a Mobius, that is a big swing in the game because they are really counting on that to keep your Loki in check. And especially decks like the Move Midrange deck feel very pressured to play their Mobius early. You can then Rogue the Mobius and then go absolutely nuts with it. This is, I think, maybe, again, it's due to just I've played a lot of Loki, but I do think that this is the best deck in the game. I would start here, and I am not unaware that my comments will be filled with, like, LOL 2 Season Pass cards. Of course it is, and I'm actually thinking about making a video on that subject in the future. But as always, my job is to give you the best decks that you can play, and this is, I think, the best one you can get away with. Now, there are some interesting sequencing things with this list. I tend to be a little bit greedy with my collectors, which goes a little bit against the Elsa game plan. So there are some situations where you actually are going to want to be playing that 1-drop early, even though you have a collector in hand. And those situations usually involve you can activate Elsa on turn 3. The way you activate Elsa on turn 3 is you go 1-drop, 2-drop, Elsa plus 1-drop. That 4th 1-drop better be Kitty. And that's the general play pattern that you're going to want to take when you have it. Elsa is more important than Loki in this deck. Elsa is more important than Collector in this deck. This is an Elsa deck with a Loki backup plan. It's just that it's the best version of the deck because that backup plan is also kind of ridiculous. So basically what's happening here is you're going to want to prioritize Elsa, and you're going to want to think out whether or not you can actually get that Elsa on turn 3. If you can't get that on turn 3, it's okay. You can take your time until turn 4. But playing with Elsa decks will make you better at this deck. You will generally be in a better spot the more experienced you are with playing Elsa decks. And she is the sort of primary engine here. But the thing that makes this deck strong is that you have not only her as the primary engine, but the, albeit nerfed, engine of what was the best deck in the game as your secondary engine. You can also fit in more tech. I like Rogue, I think, a little bit more than I like running Shadow King or Shang-Chi, because Rogue is a lot less good against you in mirrors. Shadow King and Shang-Chi actually can be good against you in mirrors, but if you want to try with more tech, I have no issues with that whatsoever. This is a very customizable list, but I think this is what I would consider the default, and it has been my most successful ladder list for a little bit now. Move Midrange is in an awkward spot because there are a lot of things that it has going for it. It's a deck that is mostly immune to Shang-Chi with the exception of an Elsa division. It is a deck that puts a lot of power on the board and creates a lot of 50-50 scenarios. And for that reason, I'm willing to recommend it, but I'm not willing to say it's the best deck in the game, even though I do consider it very well positioned right now. I think it's a real, actual threat in the meta. I think it's a very solid deck. I just think the issues it has with Loki specifically are pretty tough to deal with. And then in almost every other matchup, what this deck does, it's almost a little bit like old High Evolutionary, where it's just like you do all this positioning stuff, and then what ends up happening is you're playing a 50-50. And I do think that cards like Alioth and Doom may not be necessary in here. You can go for a lower curve version, cut both of them, add Legion and Kitty, and play a game plan a lot more similar to the Loki game plan. I tend to think that if I were to do that, I would simply just play Loki, because I think then they tend to occupy kind of the same space. And I'd rather play the deck that I think is actually better. So when we're building towards what Move does well, I think the thing it is best at is putting your opponents in true 50-50 situations. if you're someone who liked Old High Evo, if you're someone who liked even Galactus, I think you will probably enjoy this deck. But I think one big difference from Galactus is it's less a lock-up deck. There are some lockups, but you are going to have to actually, pick a lane for it to go in, which is probably not familiar to all of you Galactus players. As always, the free-to-play deck of the week is gonna be Shuri. She gets the job done. We've talked ad nauseum about Shuri. Look, right now, there's still a fairly limited amount of Shang-Chi running around the metagame, and because of that, this deck gets to eat. Absolutely eat. Now, again, you don't necessarily have to play this exact build of it. I'm including the Mobius because I really hate losing to Loki, but I honestly think Luke Cage might be a better inclusion there because of the amount of Shadow King. Consider that a true flex spot when you're looking at this. I think Luke Cage strikes me as a better option. The main thing you're going to want to worry about, though, is that Shang-Chi is creeping his way back into the metagame, and that is bad for you. It's not something you want to be happening, and it is definitely the kind of thing that warrants a lot more caution than most people have been playing Shuri with for the most recent past. I think a lot of Shuri players have gotten very complacent about, it's fine, nobody runs Shang-Chi, and that is a recipe for losing 8 cubes at this point, because I think especially at the top of ladder, people are bringing Shang-Chi back, because the best meta for Shang-Chi is the meta where everyone says, it's fine, nobody runs Shang-Chi, right? That exact specific thing is what incentivizes people to play more Shang-Chi. In addition to the nerf to Alioth, Shang-Chi is definitely coming back in a big way, and that does impact this deck. That said, I still consider it a legit performer, and probably the top recommendation for a Series 3 only deck would be this. There are other builds of the list which are not Series 3 only. I do have this one in here because it is Series 3 only, and I wanted to make that clear, but it is still a legit deck. I'm not the biggest fan of the current iteration of Thanos. I find that Loki has a positive matchup into it, but I will say that the fundamental thing this deck does might make it the best remaining Alioth deck. I think it's a lot closer between this and Move Midrange for best Alioth deck than it was between this and the Brood deck for best Alioth deck. A lot closer. And that means that Thanos, weirdly enough, even though Alioth got nerfed, benefited from the OTA a little bit more than I think I expected. So the reason this deck plays now is just that there aren't a lot of other decks doing true Alioth lockouts now. You have true Alioth lockouts with an early Professor X into Devil Dinosaur into Alioth. And that's the exact kind of game plan that is good against where the meta is going. And what I mean by that is the meta to me seems to be trending towards running Shang-Chi, running Rogue, running these kind of cards in a lot of different Elsa shells, right? One strategy that is absolutely unbelievable against a deck relying on that shit is winning a lane with Professor X and then playing an Alioth in a 1 lane. Oh, look, that Dino, it's not getting Shang-Chi'd. It's not getting Rogued. None of that is happening. So I think Thanos is a little bit better positioned now than it was previously. Thanos is a deck that I'm very interested in exploring. This is the Johnson build. Notable flex slots include Leader. Leader is there for opposing Alioths. I don't particularly consider it necessary anymore, but I'm not sure what I would do instead. Perhaps a Shang-Chi of our own, but that's already in there. So it's all right, I guess we just run him still. We can play Claw, but I don't want to be more vulnerable to opposing rogues. So it's all right, I get it's fine. We'll play Leader. It's fine. And we'll just catch people off guard. So it's a very well-positioned deck considering that it got nerfed kind of to oblivion with the Soul Stone here. I think Thanos is more of a threat in the upcoming metagame than it was. And I do want to commend Second Dinner on the nerf to Forge. I haven't played against a single Brood Absman deck yet, and I am just really happy about that because that deck not only held more interesting archetypes down, it was just kind of incredibly boring. And Thanos is a perfect example of the archetype that it would hold down, which is okay, the Brood Abs deck is just better at being an Alioth lockout deck, so I guess you just play the Brood Abs deck instead of Thanos, and now it's kind of gone, and we can actually take a look at this. Next up is the other Shuri deck, and I got this one from Browday. Shout out to Browday at Browday Snap on Twitter, and of course the Snap Bugle that you probably already follow to get your Snap updates and news. He runs that account as well. This is the other version of the Shuri list, and it's a little bit more, you know, meta, right? Like there's an Elsa in it, is what I mean, right? There's an Elsa in it, that's what I mean. Another player who I think was instrumental to the development of this list was Yo Woody. Check him out. I think his Twitch is Yo Woody TTV, I want to say. Oh God, I'll leave it in the description. I'll leave all these links in the description, but I do want to give Yo Woody a shout out here because he was actually the first place I saw a list like this, and I was gonna play it, and then they did the OTA, and then it's like, okay, now I don't want to do it. And now we have Browday's list, which comes with the addition of Forge, and I think this is a very, very, very powerful thing to be doing. It is a little bit more flexible. Like basically what's happening here, if you haven't noticed, is there's a lot of decks that are just going to run Elsa, Kitty, Nightcrawler, Jeff, Angela, and like 6 cards are already done, right? And then you just sort of fill in the rest around those 6 cards, right? You could even argue Vision is the 7th card in that package, and then we just chose the Shuri thing to hybridize instead of Loki, right? Like, but those 6 cards, not Vision, and then Shuri package, and that's what this is. So the analogy I would draw to it is it's similar in construction to the Loki deck, because the Loki deck is those 6 cards plus the Loki package. This is those 6 cards plus the Shuri package. It's a little bit more straightforward, I think. There's a lot less like stuff that you have to do when you really have to like plan out turns in Loki. It like super sucks. This deck can just win if you just like play a Shuri. Like you can just win off 1 card. It's dope. So I do think that this is a deck to keep an eye out on because there are just so many amazing things you can do with. I don't even know if I mentioned Jeff in that package. Jesus, 6 or 7 cards. They basically a lot of mid-range strategies. You can just run this kind of stuff, and then the remaining 5 cards are just like whatever. I do consider Chavez a core piece of those weird mid-range strategies, by the way. So it might actually be like all the way up to 8 cards. Hold on, I'm gonna take it. Okay, so Kitty, Nightcrawler, Angela, Elsa, Jeff, Chavez, right? It's 6. Okay, it is 6. It's a normal 6. Still, I mean, that's a lot, right? Like, this is a distinctly different archetype than the Loki version, except it's kind of not. It's a very weird metagame. So do keep that kind of stuff in mind. This is very similar in construction, and of course, shout out to Browday and Yo Woody. I named this deck Deck 18, so I don't know which one of you I copied this from. I think Yo Woody, but I don't actually know. This is gonna be a sort of split entry because I'm not sure which of these decks I actually prefer right now. This is the Bounce Elsa archetype, which has since been overtaken by mid-rangier takes on Elsa, but I do think the fact that it has Iron Man is a generically powerful thing to do that is actually just very, 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 very strong. And that is a big help here. I will compare it to the Jane version of this, which I actually ended up just getting rid of Yellow Jacket because I fucking hate it. But like, other than that, we're pretty much doing the same type of thing. We're an Angela, Bishop, Elsa, Kitty deck, and what we're trying to do is do something stupid. Thor into Jane is obviously incredible, and we have Luke Cage to prevent our stuff from getting Shadow Kinged. And the reason I think these decks are reasonably well positioned, I think this one probably a little better positioned, is again, people are moving towards the sort of Shang-Chi and Rogue style of gameplay now that Alioth has been nerfed. And since the Alioth has been nerfed, there's also going to be less Alioth. So these decks have a pretty reasonable low-key matchup because the way they work is their threats tend to be cards you need to have on the board early, and you have a Mobius in here because you really still hate Loki. But you have a reasonable Loki matchup through those mechanisms, and if you can actually pull off your nut draw, the thing that makes this deck good is your opponent is almost always going to have priority. There's less Alioths than there's ever been, and even when Alioth had 5 power, you could actually beat it by adding power to a lane, like with a Bishop or something. So you're in a situation where you tend to have solid matchups, but you also tend to be able to value the information you have. Snaps from this deck are incredibly threatening. if you are getting snapped by someone playing this deck, it is so scary because there's a lot of situations where they snap you on turn 5 and play a Jane, and then you realize you are absolutely monstrously dead if their hand includes Mysterio and Hitmonkey. Like, you just absolutely cannot beat it, and they snapped you before they played the Jane, and that tends to be this deck's sort of bread and butter, is being able to be a good deck that does not get screwed by the tech cards, which I do believe are coming back into vogue. And I will say, I think that's what gives this build the edge over the Iron Man build, because Iron Man is excessively vulnerable to Rogue. So I don't think this is a deck I would outright recommend. It's a deck that I think kind of has been around for a little bit. I think I saw Jeff Hoagland play it. I think I saw Yo Woody play it. I know there's some people like Stefan, aka Slicenberger, in my Discord, and Stefan in game. It's like a top 100 player who's been playing a lot of Darkhawk stuff. I think actually one of my mods on Twitch, KX4N, sort of pioneered this. As far as the man thing goes, I can't tell if he's actually good. I think he is, but I think a lot of the reason people are playing him right now is because he's on the weekend quests, and because he's new, and because he's cool. It's an interesting deck, in my opinion. Like, Man-Thing is an absolute hammer of a lane winner. Any deck with Rogue and Shang-Chi is actually pretty good right now. Like, this is just a very solid deck that wants to play a relatively fair game of Marvel Snap. And this is the build that I think I want to say this is Jeff Hoagland's build. But again, build attribution, very difficult. It's kind of fake anyway. I just do it because I want to put people on. So that is the configuration. If you really wanted to play this, I would do it. I do think there's a ton of room for flex in this build. I would say only a few cards here are actually core. And one thing you're going to want to think about a lot when you play this deck is how much you should respect your opponent having a specific card based on the odds of them having it with X amount of rocks in their deck. I do think that a lot of people don't think about that, and it is kind of an important aspect of saying, all right, do I have to play around this or not, and having an informed opinion on what the odds actually say, whether they're in your favor or not. And I think this list is genuinely solid, but it does have some like bits where it clunks, and the main situation I see it clunk in is you're not getting a Zabu, right? Like, you either don't play Zabu or you get Mobius, and then your final turn is really awkward. And that's why Doom is in the deck, right? Instead of Chavez, because Doom is in the deck because your final turn with this deck can almost never cover 2 lanes if you aren't playing Zabu, right? You just don't have a lot of like 2+4 plays that you can reasonably make. The best one you can do is like Shadow King plus a big guy, but Shadow King's not always going to be good because they have a loot cage, right? Like, in those scenarios, you're fine doing 2+4. But a lot of the rest of the time, you're just like, oh my God, I really need to just put some power in every lane. And that's what Dr. Doom does. He's also, you know, a good Iron Lad hit. Can't say anything about that. But that's really the reason he's in here, is just like, it's very hard for you as this kind of deck to seriously contest multiple lanes at the end of the game. And you're often in situations where you really want to do that, right? Where you like have one lane won and you think maybe they can contest another, but you just want to spread power out, and that's what Doom is doing here. So I do think I'd prefer him to basically any other 6 here. He is fulfilling a very important role in the current metagame for me. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that. It was obviously a pleasure to record. Thank you so much for sticking with me long enough to see me saying this. As always, if you enjoyed that video, which you kind of probably did, right? Like, you're here, then remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you so much. I will see you in the next one. As always, I've been KMBest. You be good.